Michael Luckman. He is our guest tonight, and we've got a lot to talk about with Michael. So let's see if we can get him on the line with us here. Hopefully, I don't dial the wrong number again, and we'll be all set.
Hello?
Hello, Michael. This is
Yes.
Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm great.
I'm doing good. I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us tonight.
Okay. How long are we going to go, by the way?
Anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's
Okay.
okay.
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I don't know exactly where you'd like to start. I guess we could start with you telling a little about you and where all this started for you.
Okay.
All right.
I've been at this now, at UFO research for about 25, 30 years at least. And it began when I was editing and publishing a new newspaper in New York called the New York Daily Planet at that time. And we were looking to do things that were different from conventional papers or even underground newspapers at that time. So I figured we would that it might be interesting to look into starting a regular section on UFOs. And I didn't really know at that point what existed, but I started to do some research, and I found that there were organizations and that there was real material out there, and that was worthwhile, as well as I was particularly drawn by photographs. Even at that time, there were some excellent cases. So that's what got me started. I decided, this was around the time of the release of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that I got a contract for a book with Simon and Schuster. It was to be a picture book, essentially 50% pictures, and there were color pictures, and it would be a large format book, very expensive to produce. I did my end of it, and but they didn't keep to their end of the bargain. They had to cut back that particular season, unfortunately, cut back their budget. So therefore, the book never really came out. But it got me going, and I met a man by the name of Coleman Bronkowitsky, who's passed on now, who was with a group called IQ-FON, and he was a retired major in the Royal Hungarian Army, and was very much into UFOs, and between information and documents that I got from him, and also from Peter Gerson, who was an attorney, who was the first one here in New York, was the first one to sue the government under the Freedom of Information Act for release of documents. So slowly we began to accumulate an enormous amount of data, and that's what got me started. And once you get involved with this subject, it's like emotional quicksand. There's no getting out. It's just that kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, it's quite a rabbit hole, isn't it?
It is, and unbelievable, as a matter of fact. And then more recently, about 5 years ago, I wanted to do a book about rock stars and UFOs, because I had known that there were lots of rock groups out there and individual rock stars who had not only believed in these things, but also had experiences. But as I started to dig around, I found out that there was a remarkable number of rock stars that have had these experiences. And what was particularly telling to me was that it included many of the key rock and roll icons, from Elvis to the Beatles, John Lennon specifically, as well as Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie, and on and on and on. So Jerry Garcia, and many, many others. So that was my first published book, which was Alien Rock, the Rock and Roll Extraterrestrial Connection, which ironically was also Simon and Schuster. And then more recently, I've been working on a book, a sequel to the Alien Rock book, called Rock Stars, Hollywood, and Alien Contact, Celebrities Inside Secrets. And I'll tell you, at this point, Michael, I have literally hundreds of well-known rock stars and Hollywood celebrities who have had all kinds of remarkable things happen to them, ranging from UFOs. And my book is not only about UFOs, it's concentrating on that, but it's also getting into other paranormal activities and beliefs. And so there's just no end to this in sight. And this has been the time, I would say, within the last few years, that many rock stars and particularly many Hollywood celebrities have come forward, come out of the closet, as it were, with this subject. And and it's increasingly a popular subject, particularly with the rise of the popularity of shows like Ancient Aliens on History Channel, things of that nature. And so there's it's going to be a blockbuster book, I can tell you that. And I don't want to give away too much of what's in the book. I can give you a few examples later. It's a shocker, I can tell you that.
Oh, I bet it is. I mean, just the short time I've been doing this radio show, I have come across more information, more documentation, more stories, and then I've had my own sightings. So I know that this phenomena is real. And what in your research, what have you found out? Any smoking guns?
Well, well, smoking guns. Well, first of all, I've long debated this subject with lots of people. I've been on television many times on some major shows. I was even on the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash. I was on Bill O'Reilly's show on the Fox News Channel, if you can believe that. And Bill wound up saying that you're the guy the aliens are going to call if they call anyone. and he didn't at that point. He really wasn't grounded in the subject at all, so I had an advantage on him. He's since gotten to know a little bit more about it, and his skeptical side is come out. And I've been trying to get back on the show for a while, and so far I haven't been able to. And as you probably know, this is a subject that the news media basically tries to belittle and tries to sidestep and ignore. And proof of that is that there were these hearings, these mock hearings in Washington not that long ago, which Steve Bassett had put together with a lot of the key government whistleblowers having to do with Roswell and UFOs in general. And it was chaired by 5 former congressmen and senators. So it was a very compelling conference that went on for a couple of days. And while it was covered by the media, the major networks and stuff basically didn't show up. And that's just, sinful, but that's the way it is. Now, I'm as I say, I still am always willing to debate the issues of UFOs, whether they exist or not. But the reality is, the truth is that I have in my possession 400 videotape depositions by 400 former military people. Many of them served in the Pentagon in the 60s and 70s. They're all prepared to testify before Congress, every single one of them, if they're granted presidential immunity, something which Lawrence Rockefeller, the late New York-based philanthropist, tried to get the Clinton administration to do. Clinton was, of course, on Jimmy Kimmel's show a few weeks ago, and he really put his foot in his mouth. He said first he said, of course, that it wouldn't be surprised if extraterrestrials, I shouldn't say of course, he said it wouldn't be surprised if extraterrestrials landed here someday.
Yeah.
Okay, to me that was very, very important that he said that, because no other president or former president ever come close to making that kind of a statement, and it suggests that we're being prepared for the reality of contact in the not too distant future. When that is, I don't know.
That's what I think. I think we're being conditioned. But yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Okay. Secondly, he said, he almost verbatim quoted Ronald Reagan without attribution. He said that the various governments of the world and different nations with their various differences would all come together and unite in the face of an alien threat. And which Ronald Reagan said it 5 times, even in a major speech at the United Nations. And Ronald Reagan had a couple of sightings himself, very dramatic ones, as a matter of fact. But what really got my goat was when Bill Clinton said on Jimmy Kimmel's show that they had looked into Roswell, that he looked into Area 51, essentially that he wasn't able to find anything, and it didn't go anywhere. Well, here was this man, Lawrence Rockefeller, who was very rich and very powerful, and he entertained the Clintons at his JY Ranch for a week or two on vacation, when they were on vacation. He's making a donation. I leaked the story at the time. He was making a donation to the Clinton re-election campaign, which he did. But he wanted to sell the Clintons on Bill Clinton specifically on opening up the information on Roswell, and he was delivering the key witnesses on a silver platter. He had people lined up, former military people, among them these 400 individuals and others, who were prepared to go public about Roswell. He absolutely didn't want to go anywhere near it. He said to Rockefeller at Rockefeller's ranch, he said that it was like a tar baby, and basically that's a folk tale, and it has to do with, essentially he was saying that's going to get stickier and stickier the more he deals with it. So he wasn't going to deal with it. Obviously, he felt that it was politically, a difficult thing for him to do.
Yeah. See, so how much do you think the government, I mean, some speculate that they don't want to let on how much they know because, they don't want to tell people there's nothing they could do about it. And then there's others who think that the government's actually working with them. I don't know what to think. All I know is that it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, well, no, I tell you, the government knows a whole lot. They may not know everything, but they know a whole lot. One problem that the government has, and the various administrations have had, is that at this point they tell the truth about this. The public's going to want to know, well, how come you kept this locked up for 60 years? That's one problem. But the Clinton's appearance on the Jimmy Kimmel show signals to me he didn't go on there. He may have been invited to go on there, but when he said he didn't, I don't even think he would have agreed to go on there if he wasn't prepared to say what he said about looking into Roswell and things like that. He may not know the exact questions that were going to be asked, but he was pretty prepared, I would say. And someone gave him the green light, or he realized that it was okay. Now, Bill Clinton pals around with George W. Bush Sr., and George W. Bush Sr., of course, was the head of the CIA, and the CIA has kept a lid on this UFO stuff from the beginning. And when Jimmy Carter, who also had his own UFO sighting, went to Bush Sr. and wanted to get the information about UFOs, he was told that he didn't have a need to know. Now, I think Bill Clinton got more information, but the irony is that about his appearance on Jimmy Kimmel, is that Bill Clinton has always been fascinated, very interested in Roswell. In fact, he told Webster Hubbell, his golfing buddy, who for a brief while before he wound up in jail, became the Assistant Attorney General under Janet Reno. And there were two things that he wanted to look into when he went over to the Justice Department. One was who killed John F. Kennedy, his hero, and secondly, what's going on with UFOs, what's the truth about UFOs. So there's a lot to this. I could tell you, I could say some things about Obama. It just goes on and on, but I think that we're being prepared. Now, to just sort of switch tracks just slightly.
Yeah, I'll take whatever you got.
Okay, all right. Well, the thing that's going on with the environment, the Earth changes, the enormous Earth changes that are taking place, the weird weather, everything else. This is worldwide, and this is like, it's totally out of control. Now, some of it, admittedly, a lot of it is been made worse by mankind. First of all, we happen to be in what's known as a interglacial or pre-ice age stage in the evolution of the Earth. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. However, what mankind has done, and the corporations, has accelerated the problem of the greenhouse effect and stuff like that. But there is also, I'm convinced, an external force that's making it worse on a day-by-day basis. And that's what's hurling, I believe, responsible for hurling meteors, asteroids, and comets in our direction. Now, about a year ago, it's got a tremendous amount of publicity. About a year ago, there was a comet, an asteroid, a meteor that came over Russia. You may recall it had the power, the estimate, of 30 million hydrogen bombs. So this is like a flying 30 hydrogen bombs.
My God.
And it didn't impact, but it shook so much. It created such a shake, so much movement on the ground that 1,200 Russian citizens were cut by flying glass. Fortunately, there were no deaths that I'm aware of. Just the very same, and NASA didn't see it coming. The very same day, there was an asteroid 150 feet across that came within 5 minutes of striking Earth. Now, that was a smaller one and a less powerful one, but could have still done enormous damage. It could have wiped out a city, perhaps.
And that was the asteroid because I do remember they said that there was an asteroid that was going to make a close passage, and it wasn't it that same day.
That's the asteroid. And then 2 weeks later, or less than 2 weeks later, meteors were seen in at least 10, maybe up to 10 different cities all over the world. In Cuba, in Saudi Arabia, New York. I don't have the list in front of me, but it was all over the place. And since that time, and I would urge your listeners to check on an almost daily basis, space.com, which does an excellent job of recording this stuff. Mm-hmm. I would say on the average of, I don't really know what the figures are, but I would say on the average of, it seems maybe at least once a week now, that we're being hit by, when I say being hit, we're not, these are objects that are coming our way and that are being seen, meteors and asteroids. Every week or so, there are reports and and photographs and video and the whole thing. We've never, in the whole time that anyone's alive today, we've never witnessed anything like this. It's a buildup of at least, the American Meteorological Society said something like, they estimated maybe 20 or 25% increase. And it just keeps on coming. Now, my belief is, I'm a disciple of Zecharia Sitchin, the author of these books who popularized the concept of Planet X, or as it was known in the ancient times, Nibiru. Mm-hmm. He said that as Nibiru or Planet X approach, and NASA, of course, steadfastly denies the existence of it, but they're liars, total liars, it would create great earthquake activity.
And we're having a lot of that.
Yeah, and it would cause a debris field would come along with it, even precede it, and that debris field would consist of meteors, asteroids, and comets. These objects, by the way, from space, they're coming from the outer edge of our solar system. That's where they all hang out, and there's an enormous amount of activity out there. And the gravitational pull is bringing them in with the planet, the force of the planet coming toward us is causing also these asteroids and meteors to come, and comets to come in our direction. So to me, when people say, well, where's your photographic proof of Planet X? Admittedly, I haven't seen anything to my mind that's compelling on the video or photographic end yet. However, the hallmark of the arrival or the imminent arrival of Planet X, when I say imminent, I don't know when that is, but there is this continuing rain of meteors and asteroids, and there are comets too, coming toward us, and it doesn't let up. And I believe that that's what's happening. And I've offered to debate David Morrison, who's NASA's astrophysicist, on this. He's refused to debate, not surprisingly. NASA, of course, has been in the forefront of the UFO cover-up. They've been in the forefront of the cover-up of life on Mars. They just want to put out a little bit of information, but very, very slowly and very, very gradually. I worked with Tom Van Flandern, who happens to be he was a former chief astronomer for the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., and he was the one who gave Robert Harrington, who was the chief astronomer there at the Naval Observatory, he was the one who gave him the coordinates to look for Planet X. And sure enough, Harrington found Planet X. Now, Harrington is dead, I believe of cancer. Tom, who was at a news conference with me just a few years ago, where we announced the existence of another face on Mars, which would blow anyone away. I mean, Hogan, the one that Hogan talks about, is nothing compared to the face there's a face that's located in the Syrtis Major area, which the New York Post ran almost a whole page of a photograph of it when we did that news conference. Well, Tom is gone, and and Harrington is gone, and you never can tell with cancer. I mean, you can't automatically assume that they were killed or anything, but I must tell you that out of the people say, well, with Planet X, there would certainly be astronomers, some astronomers would have seen it. Well, turns out that there were something like 24 astronomers, including some very, very prominent ones, who died mysterious deaths similar to what happened in the wake of the John F. Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, Harrington found out that he had cancer, I think, 2 weeks later? Was it 2 weeks he was dead?
Who was that?
Was that Harrington, who within 2 weeks he got infested with cancer and died?
Yeah, I don't know what the timing was exactly, but it was a short time after.
Yeah.
Tom Van Flandern made the announcement. It was a short time after that Harrington got cancer, and Tom himself died I don't think Tom was more than maybe at most maybe about 60 or so, and seemed to, for all intents and purposes, to be quite healthy. But these people died extreme deaths, some of them, and so that really bears looking into. Now, what dovetails with this is the third secret of Fatima. The third secret of Fatima is the most carefully guarded secret by the Vatican, and it has to do with a bolide or a very, very large meteor or asteroid coming toward Earth. And in this general time period, not any specific year, but as far as I know, but in this general time period, and obliterating, wiping out most of the Earth by flooding, like a biblical flood. And I know this because it was, trying to think of the man's name. I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, there was this priest who was very much in the inner circle in the Vatican. His name is Father Malachi Martin.
Oh, yeah.
He was on the Art Bell show several times, a bunch of times. And Art tried to get him to talk about the third secret of Fatima. Now, he's one of the very few people who was privy to the information. And he really was. And he said, finally, that it had to do with a bolide, he used the term bolide, coming toward us, and that the Vatican was very, aware of it. And also Pope John II, at one point, sort of let the cat out of the bag. He was asked by some pilgrims why the church didn't, because there's a whole movement in the Catholic Church to get to the truth about the third secret of Fatima. Whether people know what that third secret is or not, they want to know why it's been withheld. It's supposed to be given to Catholics for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and let's not forget they launched their own telescope. Their what's it called, Lucifer.
Well, the telescope is in Mount Graham. Now, it turns out the Lucifer thing was interesting to me, but it turns out, though, that I did some more digging on that, and that telescope was named that. It had nothing to do with the Vatican. They just, when they went in there in Mount Graham, they, used that telescope. But they didn't name the telescope.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been told that's their telescope and that they named it. So, huh?
Yeah, no, they didn't name it. In fact, I saw it on their own website explaining, and I happen to believe them in this instance.
Well, so, they are looking, though.
They are definitely looking, and as a matter of fact, they recently held at Mount Graham in Arizona. They recently held a conference of 200 astronomers and other scientists having to do with contact with extraterrestrial life. So that the timing on that is kind of interesting. So there's so much to this, and then of course, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and also be happy to talk about the lighter side, somewhat lighter side, which is the celebrities and their involvement with this, which I've been researching for about 5 or 6 years now.
Sure, and I would like to point out, me myself, I am probably one of the most skeptical people when it comes to Planet X. I mean, I've always believed there was something out there. I've researched it endlessly. I remember back in '83 reading a science pamphlet that we got in school that talked about it. And then all of a sudden it disappeared. Well, finally, I don't know how you feel about Marshall Masters, but he was on the show not too long ago, and I said, well, I want evidence. I need a smoking gun. And he says it's on my website, the video. Well, I didn't believe him, but I went over and I watched this video that somehow I missed. And I got to say, he has shown me, I mean, there is an object somewhere far behind Saturn out there. And I've gone and I've tried to debunk it as much as I could, and all the planets are accounted for. So he did find something out there. Mm-hmm. And so,
yeah, Masters is okay. I mean, as far as his Planet X research, he's very good. I don't necessarily agree with him on everything, but he's quite good, and he's been doing this a long time.
Yeah, so I'll have to send you the link to the video and get your opinion.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, see what you think about it, because finally I've seen something that I can't debunk away. So, and that's what I've been looking for. People.
Yeah, well, if Tom Van Flandern didn't pass away, he was invaluable to me, because he was a guy I could always call up, and I'm not a scientist myself. I could always say, hey, look, what about the photo number so-and-so from NASA of anomalies on Mars, for example, or in this case, possible planet out beyond Saturn, and he would give me his analysis, and I didn't. He tended to be a little on the conservative side, but on the other hand, I'll tell you, Tom found, and we showed at our news conference. We had a couple of news conferences in New York some years ago, and we showed these extraordinary anomalies that included various faces, including this mind blower, one in the Syrtis Major region of Mars. It looks like either man or a woman, but unlike Hoagland's, which you know, I don't want to take away from the importance of Hoagland's drawing attention to it. However, this looks like could be your next door neighbor. I mean, it's very, very clear. It's not a sort of a nose. It's a nose. It's eyes. It's a mouth. It's lips. It's everything. It's wearing some kind of a crown. And so there are these tunnels that are these glassy tunnels or tubes that dart in and out of the surface. There are, of course, pyramids. There's an amazing pyramid, by the way. It's supposed to be 300 feet across. In the middle of a crater. It's on Mars. It's an official NASA photograph. It's analyzed and shown on Hoagland's website currently. And it's a mind blower. The edges are very, very straight, and it's three-sided pyramid, like perfectly shaped. It's just amazing. And probably the biggest mind blower of all to me was these photographs. Tom found, and his associates found, that there are carvings of animals. These are giant carvings of animals, and they're various animals, and the animals seem to be grouped according to the type of animal that they are. Now, that in itself is amazing, and then it begs the question, why would they, meaning the Martians, I'll call them the Martians, whoever was there, you know, whoever it might have been, why would they have gone through all of that trouble to create these massive depictions of animals, carved animals? Who was supposed to see it, and what was the purpose of it? I don't know, but it's just you know, just amazing. So you know, we're at such a point now with the flow of information that there's just no stopping it, and the cat's out of the bag, I would say, on all counts. And I believe that among those 20 or so astronomers who have met these mysterious deaths, I think some of them were on to Planet X and paid the price.
So let me ask you this: if it comes out, I mean, I've seen pictures. I know that there's more than one face on Mars. I've seen the animal carvings you're talking about, and it's just fantastic stuff. And now, if it came out worldwide and there was no more cover up on it, and hey, there was or is life on Mars, what do you think that would do to Earth itself, to the people here? How do you think it would be taken?
I think people could handle it very, very well. I don't see any problem with it. First of all, if we're talking about past life, past monuments, past carvings, things like that, we're talking about an advanced Martian civilization. I think people would be fascinated by it. I don't think that presents, you know, much of a problem. If we're talking about current activity on Mars, that's a whole different story.
Well, I wonder if we'd find out that, you know, it was us who was there, and, you know, maybe Planet X came around last time, and, you know, we had to move.
Well, Sitchin says that Mars was used. He was at one of my news conferences also, and he said that he believes that Mars was a way station. You know, when they were coming back, the Anunnaki, the inhabitants of Planet X, were coming back to Earth. He thought that they were there. But there have been, even recently, some very interesting photographs, again, official NASA photos, showing various things in the sky directly above Mars, above the surface, I should say. You know, and lights or whatever it might be, and nothing that you can, you know, be certain of, but some interesting stuff. And they always say the same thing. It's a reflection. It's this. It's this. It's this. They always have to somehow explain it away. Yeah, it reminds me of, like, a report just came out today, I think, having to do with the Antarctica ice shelf, and that it's moving dangerously toward basically collapsing or moving into the sea, which would cause an enormous rise in the sea level. But they're saying, but there's nothing to worry about. That's 100 years from now. Well, you know, the ocean levels are rising already, and there's a lot of ice melt off. So there's plenty to worry about. And I can understand why they don't want to, you know, people to panic. I understand that. I don't think there's any reason to panic as far as UFOs. Some people might, but I think an interesting, really irrelevant question for us for those in the know to ask is, when and if the Anunnaki, given that they exist, ever decide to land publicly, as they might, because if the Planet X is coming closer to us, come back and see how it was done, etc. What should our position be toward them? They're a highly advanced race, and they created us, if you believe Sitchin, to dig for gold, essentially as a slave species that was later and actually created us by jump-starting, taking free humans, essentially, combining with their DNA and creating something that was closer to a modern-day human. You know, what should our position be toward them? You know, they weren't so nice to us. They had their own purposes in mind, and on the other hand, they obviously have enormous technology, and not all of them were, you know, I mean, we were freed. So what should our position be? They certainly owe us, but the question is, what should we, you know, what should our position be? And that's something that the government and the population should be, you know, looking at.
You never know. They might feel we owe them. They might say, well, if it wasn't for us, you guys would still be playing with stones.
Well, they could say that too. I mean, sure. No, we don't know. There's a lot that we don't know.
Yeah, I know. There's really not. And, you know, I think I think most of society would handle ET landing kind of well, but I worry about that percentage that is paranoid. I mean, there's some who believe that ET wants to eat us. There's some who think that they're planning on taking over the world and that they're going to kill us or whatever it might be. And those are the ones I worry about. And then we hear about that last card of the New World Order and the alien invasion card. And
well,
you know, what if they do really land and people think that it's a fluke?
Well, if they land openly, they're obviously calling the shots. Whatever our position is, whatever the various governments of the world, the United Nations or whoever, whatever their position is, they're, because of their being so highly advanced, they're obviously calling the shots. There's nothing that we would do militarily that would be able to stop them. And I'm not saying that we should do anything like that, because I think that I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and there's certainly nothing we're going to do to stop them anyway. But you know, basically, I don't think that there's been any. If you look at the whole picture, not just the Anunnaki, but if you look at the whole question of alien contact with people here on Earth over all these years. If they wanted, you've heard this before many times, if they wanted to take us over, they could have done it. If they wanted to eat us, they could have done it. It's not happened. You know, I'm not saying it's impossible that they might take us over. The biggest problem I think that we face, whether it's the Anunnaki or somebody else, is that the culture shock would be enormous, even for someone, you know, people like ourselves who believe in this. Still, the culture shock of dealing with a highly advanced race. I mean, we're talking about scientists estimate that these beings could be 100,000 times more intelligent than us. What if they were only 10 times more intelligent than us? wouldn't we be at a great disadvantage? But 100,000 times, we can't even equate that. I mean, we can't even understand what that is. So that's what we're dealing with, and or that's what we may be dealing with, and it's important that people realize that.
All right, hang on with us for a moment, Michael. We have David. David, where are you calling from again? I forget where you're from.
Woodland Hills, California, Michael.
Well, welcome aboard, David.
Thank you. I had a question for Michael Luckman, and I hadn't heard anything concerning the underground tunnels in this country, and I wondered if he knew anything about them.
Well, now, are you talking about tunnels in the United States?
Yeah, they go all around the world, but primarily the ones that go to the underground military base at Dulce, New Mexico.
Yeah. Well, my only comment, I'm really not that familiar with that question, but I will answer to this degree. All of that business about there being around, when you mentioned Dulce, that puts up a red flag in my mind. The whole idea of that there might be some kind of a deal made between the aliens and the United States government or other governments of the world, and that there are humans that have been killed and body parts that are being stored up in giant vats. That's all nonsense. It's been popularized by a former CIA pilot by the name of John Lear. And that's exactly the kind of paranoia that we don't need. And that's exactly the kind of disinformation that, unfortunately, we face. But it's very important to clarify that. Now, I'm sure there are all kinds of underground tunnels and things that we know about, and also things that we don't know about. And I would think that they are much more related to the ability of government officials to basically find shelter, go to shelters underground at a time of a possible, doomsday type of scenario, whatever might bring that on.
Well, I just wonder because several years back I'd watched some videos done by a man named Phil Schneider. Are you familiar with him? He was
no, not at all. No.
Well, he worked for the government. He did blasting for these underground tunnels and whatnot, and he reports on the YouTube in several videos how he, in one of his excavation sites, he accidentally came upon a underground tunnel area that was inhabited by the Greys, and he had a shootout with several of them down there, and 66 of his men had died in this incident. And then about several years later, he was assassinated or died in his own apartment. But I also wanted to ask you, because you guys were talking about this subject about aliens, and I've always known that there were some negative aliens that were taking people like Betty and Barney Miller and picking them up in the 60s and whatnot. But then I have personally been contacted by a group that goes by the name of the Federation of Planets, and they're a benevolent group, and they're the ones that are here at the moment making their presence known in broad daylight and at night as well, with groups of lights in the sky. And they've told me that what they plan to do is implode the artificial moon above in September of 2015, which would be about a year before the next election, and that is to bring the 19 to 35-year-olds together so they could landslide this next election for the party nationofchange.org and get some good leadership in our government to rectify the situations that are happening at the moment. Were you aware of them and their federation?
No, I haven't heard of that group of aliens, but there's no surprise to me. I mean, there's obviously, here I am in New York City, and not everyone's friendly. So we know that out in space that not anyone who may come down here, they're not all going to be friendly. But again, they haven't taken us over, haven't even come close to that kind of a scenario.
Right. Well, what I understand from this, Joseph is the gentleman I spoke with in person a couple times. He looks just like we do. He told me that the Greys, which are in the underground system, primarily at Dulce, they are behind the Monsanto company, the HARP systems, and Big Pharma, and the leading of the medical community down the wrong path, so to speak. And their Agenda 21, which I'm sure you've heard of, is to eliminate 90% of the populace by 2029, so they can round up the rest and keep them like cattle in the field. And what they do is they take our children, and they are doing this at the moment, and they're draining their pituitary glands of hormonal extract to mix with chemicals that they take in orally, and that's what the plan is with this Agenda 21, is to allow them to do this more easily with a more manageable group of humans. But like I said, the Galactic Federation is here to rescue us, and what they've offered me is, they told me if we win this next election and we can get things straightened out here, they're going to offer us a wheel-shaped space station in place of the moon with a reflective dish, and then give us our own fleet of starships, which we'll use to find the planet Earth 2, which we'll re-inhabit in the next 1,000 years.
Let me ask you a question. How do you know that they're extraterrestrial? You say they look just like us.
Well, I'll tell you, for a Thursday and a Friday, they appeared straight up over my apartment. I'm about 100 yards from the Venice shoreline, on just in back of the Venice boardwalk. And all kinds of people stopped over and were pointing up in the air, going, "What is that silver ball up over your house?" And there's helicopters and airplanes dragging signs and whatnot. And I said, "I don't know." And then about 6 o'clock that Friday, I was sweeping out in the front yard, and I looked up at it, and I said, "Well, if you want something, why don't you just say what it is?" And I received a thought transmission that Saturday they would be sending somebody down to speak with me. So Saturday, someone did come down, and we had a lengthy conversation, two of them, in fact, and just kind of got the ball rolling as far as actual communication goes. I've had several different sightings in my life for the last 30 years, but
why do you think they chose you to be the one to receive any kind of a message like that?
Well, I'm going to be running in this next election on the ticket, nationofchange.org. I ran in this last one, but it was kind of a practice session. And Jesse Ventura, who I'm going to get as a running mate, as my VP candidate, we're both kind of normal people, but we're intelligent as far as the needs and desires and wants of our country and the world. What we're going to be doing is legalizing hemp for industrial production and converting our engines over to hydrogen from the water. And then we're going to be setting up a free electrical system in the country, which Nikola Tesla did in 1895 at the Chicago World's Fair, which will allow everyone to really save $1 and do a lot more as far as their own production goes. But these are just three of the things that we're going to be talking about in the next year's time. But that's why the moon's going to be imploded, is to get the audience, so to speak, to sit up and listen. But when this happens, it's going to cause our planet to rotate 80 degrees, putting North and South America on the new equatorial line, they told me, which will cause a big backsplash on the coasts on that day. But as long as the populace hears about it and are prepared for it, I don't think we'll have any problems.
Okay.
But I'm, like I say, I've been pursuing this endeavor for about 25 years now, and just getting the background and the listening and whatnot. And I just wanted to call in tonight and let you know that there are things happening that are good and positive. And like I say, if all goes as accordingly, we will join the Galactic Federation as another planet and be exchanging people with them, and it'll upscale our education and upscale our medical facilities and everything in the next 5 years, 10
well,
10
assuming
years.
Assuming that's all real, it sounds very positive.
Yeah, it is totally, and that's why I just wanted to let you know and let everyone know that's listening to this program that there is good things coming, and it's not all bad, and it's not nothing to go jump off a building and kill yourself over just because you lost your job and your car and your wife and everything else, because it's going to get better.
David, I got a question for you too. I was asked to ask you who is in charge of the Federation of Light. Who's at the head?
The word light is kind of a misnomer. It's the Galactic Federation of Planets. So when someone mentions it used to be the Confederation of Light. And when I heard that originally about 6, 7, 8 years ago, I was leery that this could be a plant by the Greys to dissuade the listeners and to lead them off down the rosy trail, so to speak. This group is known as the Galactic Federation of Planets. And that's what they've introduced themselves to me as. That's what they've told me they were all along. So anybody who talks about light, I don't know who they're talking to or exactly what their intentions are. But this group is, like I say, the Federation of Planets.
Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, I didn't know if that was the same as the Galactic Federation of Light. I've heard that talked about, and apparently it's supposed to be they worship Lucifer or something like that. I was just making sure it wasn't the same thing.
That right there, you hit a nail on the head. That's the Greys. Possibly there's a few reptilians left here on this planet underground with them, but yeah, they're the bad guys. They are the ones that are trying to overthrow and instigate this Agenda 21.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I just wanted to clear it up, make sure it wasn't the same one, but I appreciate that. Anything else?
Well, I was kind of disappointed in Stanton Friedman's answers the other night, but he's a little over the hill. But like I said, it's up to the 19 to 35-year-olds whether they want to take this country and want to run it the right way. Anybody that's established, anybody that's older, like ourselves, we can't seem to get any agreement amongst our age group of people. I'm 58, and we just can't get anybody to say the same thing. You know, there's so much arguing and bickering amongst types and races and whatnot. It's going to be up to the younger people to get this country and straighten it out.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's true. Well, first we got to get them off Facebook and get the iPads out of their hands, or the iPhones.
Well, that's actually the way we're going to be communicating our ideas and putting forth these new governmental proposals is through those means, and because they're not tuned into the 5 channels, and they're not wasting their time on sports, and they're not at the bars, carousing with till late hours of the morning. You know, they still got some life in them.
Uh-huh. All right. Well, hey, David, we're going to have to get you back on the show soon because I want to talk more about that Federation of Planets at some point.
Well, I want to be on with Rascala any old time he wants to come on because he's a really smart guy.
Yeah, he is. He's great. Well, all right. Well, thank you for the call.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Have a good one.
Bye.
So, Michael, you haven't heard of these federations.
No, I haven't. But what this gentleman just touched on, we should say something about. I think as far as the Greys and the abduction scenario, I've met personally quite a few individuals who believe that they've been abducted, and the thing that's almost always the case is that here people are. It seems to be a interdimensional kind of phenomenon, and that people's report that their body is being, at the moment that they're being taken on board, that their body is moving through what would be normally would be a closed window or door in their apartment or in their home. So that suggests an out-of-body type of experience to me. On the other hand, they come back, and some of them, not that many of them, but a significant percentage nonetheless, have some kind of scars or what appear to be scars, and in a few cases even apparent implants, although I'm not convinced on the implants yet, but still worth further investigation. So it suggests a interdimensional or out-of-body type of of experience. Now, David Jacobs, who was at Temple University, who spent a lot of time looking into the abduction phenomenon, actually believes that a race is of hybrids is being created, and that women are being impregnated and that sort of thing, artificially inseminated, I should say. And what to make out of the abduction scenario, I don't quite know. There just isn't enough information. But so many people have had. I mean, according to polls, something like hundreds of thousands of people across the world who have reported abduction type of scenarios like this.
Yeah, and I often wondered about that because I had, when I was a child, I had a couple out-of-body experiences. And a friend of mine who, well, he does pretty good at psychic connections types of things. And, well, he says he kind of indicated that it could have been abduction. And, I don't have any memory of any abductions or anything like that, but I did have the out-of-body experiences. And I remember I couldn't leave the room, no matter what door I opened, closet or door leading to hallway. They both turned out to be closet doors, like I wasn't allowed to leave. Yeah. And I understand that sometimes when they abduct children, they'll, holographic images that will make the child think that they're in their room or they're somewhere it makes them feel comfortable.
Well, an important sidelight to this is that quite a number of the abductees have been shown by their alien captors, would-be alien captors, by extraterrestrials, whatever, grays, whatever you want to call them, these scenes of future destruction of the Earth. And, of course, in view of what's going on now, you really got to wonder if they're onto something, and they obviously are, because I mean we know that the Earth is going through these horrendous changes that are getting worse all the time, and people are being warned and prepared for other things like that, other destruction to come.
Yeah. Now, speaking of destruction and end times, I was watching, I think it was a YouTube video today. I was watching a little bit, and you were discussing the end times and how a lot of people tried to connect the Mayan calendar in 2012 to the end. And a lot of people tried to put Planet X on that. And at no time was, any real researcher saying that 2012 was when the end was going to come. It was just the end of the calendar. But
I happen to have contact with quite a number of the key Mayan elders. There was an event that I promoted here in New York called The Legend of the 13 Crystal Skulls, and that was about several years ago, right before the end date on the Mayan calendar. And it was quite an event, but besides the event, I got to know a few of the key individuals. I even later got to meet Don Tomas Calvo, who is considered to be the highest spiritual leader of the Mayan people. He's from Guatemala. In effect, he's the Mayan Pope. And I sat down with him, did an interview with him for about an hour. Now, none of the Mayan elders or anyone else I've ever been in contact with, whether they're from Mexico or Guatemala, have ever said that was going to be that December 21st, 2012 was going to be the end of the world. This was purely an invention by the news media, and I'm not exactly sure where it came from, but it didn't come from the Mayans at all, that's for sure. And they kind of created a paper tiger, constantly referring back to that this was going to be the end of the world, that people believe in this. And then, of course, when it didn't come, they said, well, we told you so. So they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. But the Mayan leaders, though, do believe that we have been going through in this time period, and it's going to get far worse the kind of environmental catastrophes that we've been facing are going to get far, far worse, and that we have to go through that in order to be able to come out the other end, as it were, and that it's going to have an enormous toll. There's disagreement by different individual Mayan leaders as to how devastating a toll, but they do, some of the key people do believe in Planet X. They do believe in a potential pole shift as a result of Planet X, which is, of course, probably the worst scenario that we could ever imagine.
Yeah.
But they do believe ultimately that the human race will survive, and they very much believe in extraterrestrials. And what was a big surprise to me at the following that event of the 13 crystal skulls, basically the idea about the 13 crystal skulls is that at a time of great stress, when humanity was at a crossroads, so to speak, that these skulls were, these ancient skulls were to be brought together, and they would more or less point the way, in effect. Well, what happened was, it was an extraordinary event. It took place at the Fashion Institute of Technology Auditorium here in New York. There were about 500 or 600 people parading around the outer perimeter of the auditorium, led by the Mayan elders, with these crystal skulls. And many of the people, I'd say half of them, brought their own crystal skulls of various sizes with them. So the lives are very different. And 4 of the 13 ancient crystal skulls actually change color from a milky white to clear on their left side, and only on their left side, within weeks following that event. No explanation as to what it means or why it happened, but it did happen. We have photographs, the whole thing.
Wow. That's interesting. See, now I've done only a couple shows on crystal skulls, and, you know, I understand that the crystal can be used to store information.
Yes.
And, you know, I've always wondered if these things weren't some kind of ancient hard drive, if you will. But I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And some of the so-called crystal skull guardians, people who own these crystal skulls, and they came from all over the world, by the way, to attend this event, and the skulls came from all over the world, felt that compelled to bring the skulls to New York for this event. It was almost as if the skulls were telling them that they wanted to be there at that event. It sounds crazy, but that's what they reported over and over again. That's
fascinating. That is. You know, there's a lot of mystery, and I have a friend, Peter Kling, who, you know, he's, I guess, researches the Bible is the best way to put it, and he looks at it, he says, scientifically, and he believes we're in the times of Revelation. Would you agree? The end times?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I'm not a deeply religious person, but yes, I mean, generally speaking, I would say so. And by the way, something that happened, I guess it was at least a year and a half, maybe even 2 years ago now. This UFO sighting that happened near adjacent to the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, where a UFO came down, a bright light came down above, it came all the way down to the horizon, and then quickly, very bright, shot right up, and there were a cascade of maybe a dozen or more red lights above, which blinked out really quickly. But the fact that that happened at the Dome of the Rock in this particular time period, and that happened and was photographed by at least 4 different cameras in 4 different angles, including the weather camera, which takes pictures every, I think, 10 seconds, takes stills. And that object was there, and it wasn't the military. And why was it at the Dome of the Rock? I mean, it was probably the most important, single most important religious site in the world. But it happened, and I went on Fox and Friends on television, and at that time said that this, to me, seemed to be a prelude to what some people would consider the second coming.
Yeah, well, maybe he'll be coming on a spaceship.
It could very well be. You know, Shirley, not many people know this, but Shirley MacLaine, who I know, had a private meeting in her apartment here in Manhattan with Zachariah Sitchin while he was still alive. And her key question to him was, she wanted to know whether he considered that Jesus Christ was an extraterrestrial. And Sitchin was really, for all of his statements that people think are so outrageous, some people, he really was a fairly conservative man. His lifestyle was very conservative, very old-fashioned. And yet, so therefore, he didn't want to make any kind of a statement to Shirley, even if she kept it quiet, because he knows that, you know, it might get around still. And he didn't want his views known on it. But obviously, his views were that, yes, that what people refer to as Jesus Christ could have very well have been a extraterrestrial.
Yeah, you know, and it kind of makes sense. And, you know, we've got people who, I don't know how much stock can be put into it, but people who claim that they've time traveled and even teleported and things like that. And you got to think if that technology exists. I'm one who believes that we're not inventing new technologies, we're reinventing technologies, I think. And if that technology existed, there's, you know, my God, no end to what could be.
Yeah, well, yeah, and there's some belief that some of the technology that we presently have, and that the government uses, the military uses, and major corporations use, was as a result of back engineering projects involving recovered spacecraft, particularly the one in Roswell. That has been very much discussed and written about.
I see. Now, something that caught my eye and really interested me was the Signal to Space concerts. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, actually, I haven't been asked about the Signal to Space concerts in a little while. I'll tell you what happened with the Signal to Space concerts. It was a magnificent concept, and it required enormous funding. It would have required at least just a starting figure would have been about $25 million. We were able to get under contract $2 million. I met with the investors that came over here from Berlin. They were mostly from Berlin. We were able to get some seed money, a couple $100,000 in seed money, but they did sign contracts for $2 million for various reasons, mainly because at that time the stock market went south. They had to withdraw, leaving us to just, let it go or take them to court, which is a very lengthy and expensive process. So we let it go. But the idea of the Signal Space concerts were to do very large Woodstock-type concerts, like a UFO Woodstock, and to do them in Berlin, in New York City, upstate New York, and in Japan, Tokyo. And we had a great amount of interest. As I said, most of the funding was coming from Berlin, because my partner was based part of the time in Berlin. And some very large corporations, as big as Daimler Chrysler, for example, really got into this and really wanted to support it. But first, I had to come first with, at least a couple of $1 million. And as I say, it didn't quite come through. But we would have had the biggest artists, people probably on the level, let's say, certainly on the level of Paul McCartney or Robbie Williams, and lots of other people like that. Michael Jackson, who at the time was alive. And the idea was to beam rock music mostly, although other forms of music too, to locations on the moon and on Mars, and to try to make make communication using music as a form of communication. And since that time, there has been music. For example, at a Paul McCartney concert it was arranged that the music was beamed by NASA to a distant star that they thought might harbor life. I think the song I know the song, the Beatles song "Across the Universe" was being there also at one point. So this is something that's, that rock musicians are getting more and more into. I think even Lady Gaga is supposed to be going up in the next year or two in a rocket.
Oh no! They send
and,
her up there,
and this is in conjunction with a concert here down on the ground, where she was going to perform in space. And Michael Jackson told me that he wanted to, and he was serious about it. He wanted to perform the moonwalk on the moon.
No kidding. Well, the Lady Gaga, Michael Jackson, okay. Lady Gaga, if that's the message, the first message they receive from us, we could be in a lot of trouble here.
Well, it's the end of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But I like the concept. That's very interesting.
Yeah, we would, we almost pulled it off. The thing is that it was a very, very big concept. It involved a huge amount of money, and and we came close, but we weren't able ultimately because of the stock markets. We weren't able to have those investors keep their commitments.
That's too bad. I have a feeling if Michael Jackson was still alive, he'd probably put quite a bit towards it.
Well, yeah, I actually, I'll tell you, I would say of all of the rock musicians and pop stars that I'm aware of, and I've done a lot of research for so many years now, the two outstanding ones in terms of ones who, if anyone would invest money in this sort of thing, it might be Robbie Williams, who's the biggest pop star in England and very heavy in Europe, not as well known in the United States, and also another British great pop group, Muse, and Matt Bellamy, who was the head of the group Muse. In fact, when they were performing in Madison Square Garden here in New York, they almost came over. We almost had a meeting, but scheduling got in the way. It didn't quite happen. But Matt Bellamy is very much, they talk about. They have a whole song about UFO disclosure, and at their concerts they have like this. I don't know how they did this. A huge flying saucer with a female alien dangling from beneath it as it circled the crowd, and at a certain point it came down like maybe 20, she came down maybe 20 feet above the crowd's head. It was just unbelievable.
Wow.
So like a lot of stars are into this. Alice Cooper, who lives in Phoenix, Arizona, was an eyewitness to the Phoenix lights. There's so many rock stars and so many celebrities who are into this. Even for whatever anyone might think of them, even the Kardashians, they had a special trip. They went to Area 51. They didn't get in, of course, but they did go there. And, so in fact, they went there in the company of, in a big van, in the company of Travis Walton, the famous Fire in the Sky abductee.
Yeah, he's one of my favorites because his story, I just, you can't throw stones at it.
Right.
These guys passed lie detector tests and so it's one of the more credible stories, I believe.
It is a very compelling story.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, something else I wanted to ask you about was the alien autopsy. Now, you say it was a hoax.
Well, actually, I was the first one and the only one at the time to say it was a hoax. Now, I say that based on the it was just so clear to me that it was so cheesy in the way that it was produced that it had to be a hoax. And I was quoted in the New York Daily News was a picture of me, and it was a picture of, I forget his name, the guy who produced this, and Fox made a tremendous amount of money off of this. It was not only the first alien autopsy special, but they ran a series of specials, and then later they even had the nerve to run a debunking one, saying that, well, you know, we thought it was real, but it turned out it wasn't real. So it definitely was proven not to be real, and I was absolutely right. But Fox saw it as something that they could make a lot of money off of, and they did.
Well, you know what kind of tickles me a little bit on that is that I remember, I think it was Thanksgiving. I was sitting around with family, and there was a special on about this alien autopsy, and there was actually, they were supposed to be the best Hollywood graphics, makeup, special effects artists that there was, and these guys says that they couldn't recreate that. So what does that say for them?
yeah, I know. I remember that. I'm trying to think of the man's name who was the producer of it. But I called it in the very beginning. I said I was quoted in papers saying that it was a P.T. Barnum style hoax, and the producer, of course, said that Robert somebody said that that it was real, and etc. And, well, it did turn out to be a hoax.
All right. Well, Michael, hang on one more time. We're going to take one more break, and then we'll come back, and you and I will finish up. So hang on there, folks.
You know, Bigfoot is the one thing that I almost never deal with. I don't really have any strong opinion on Bigfoot. I don't find the issue of whether Bigfoot exists or not compelling. I do think that there's been, fakery involved with it. I wouldn't want to comment even any further than that. It's really not something that I pay much attention to.
Well, I've kind of been with you on that. It's not something that I pay a whole lot of attention to, although if I had to guess what's going on there, if that phenomena is real, then I would have to guess it's connected to ET or it's interdimensional, because they're there and they're gone, according to people. So,
yeah. Again, it's not. It doesn't get my attention, generally speaking. I just don't know what to make of it. There's so many things to deal with here. I'd rather go to the things that have a real solid foundation and real solid evidence, hopefully bordering on proof.
Well, I'm with you. No argument here. The other question was the severity of our environment. Are we at the point of no return? In your opinion?
We're definitely at the point of no return. Now, I mean, but when you say point of no return, I mean, some of us will make it through. The problem is that most of us probably will not, and it's going to for those who do survive. The phrase "when the strong survive" are going to have to go through a whole lot physically and emotionally, spiritually to make it, and it's really going to take a great deal of persistence and a lot of luck too. That you're in the right place at the right time, or that you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time, because depending very much, it's the luck of the draw where you happen to be at any given time. There's no place in the whole world that's safe. There are relatively safer spots, but even places that might not be prone to earthquakes may be prone to other weather phenomena. There's this terrible weather phenomenon that it's very rare, but I've seen photographs of it. It's really frightening. It's called a fire-nado. It's a tornado of fire, and it's basically, I guess, it's flames from the ground that are being whipped up. Something that most likely humans cause the fire, but it gets whipped up into a moving torrent of fire. And it's been reported or not reported. It happened in Australia, and there was another one somewhere in the Midwest. It was photographed in the paper the other day. So we're going to really, and of course, I was about 8 months before the Hurricane Sandy hit here in New York City. I was interviewed by the New York Daily News by a couple of reporters, and I said that that New York had a real problem as far as flooding, and that sooner or later, and probably sooner, we're going to get hit. And then 8 months later, of course, we did have it. And let me tell you something. There were blackouts downtown in New York, which I was affected by. And you think, well, you can make it through a blackout. I mean, so it's a little inconvenient. Let me tell you, suddenly having to live by candlelight just for 5 days, as it turned out, really is something you think that you're doing okay. But it took me in terms of my my mind, it took me probably 10 days to 2 weeks to really get back to normal, because you're just not used to living in that kind of a circumstance. So we haven't seen anything yet. I mean, the temperature extremes, the flooding, it's really going to be very, very bad. And as I say, the inexcusable part, the part of nature and Planet X, we can't do anything about that. The inexcusable part is that we have caused a lot of this to grow worse. And there's a book that I would recommend called The Sixth Extinction, which talks about, it's been very highly praised, and it talks about the role of super corporations and what they have done in the name of profit. And it's very much has to do with of course, with the greenhouse effect, and the handwriting's on the wall. We're in the soup. We're like sitting ducks. There was an intergovernmental panel on global warming that specifically said we're all like sitting ducks.
Yeah, and if that's not enough to scare somebody, how about Fukushima?
Oh, well, now on Fukushima, the thing about Fukushima is that the nuclear meltdown that happened in Japan. And by the way, I'm seeing many, many, many more people, particularly young people, Japanese people, moving to New York, living here now, unlike I've ever seen before. They're afraid of the radiation. Now, the thing is, this is a silent killer, and you have from the tsunami, you have wreckage from the tsunami floating toward the Pacific, the West Coast. And it's a terrible, terrible situation. In fact, and you can't, Kobe beef, which is the most famous beef, most expensive beef, normally be imported from Japan, isn't even allowed here in New York anymore.
Yeah, and I've got friends who live in Hawaii, and they have a friend who is from Japan, and she comes back and forth, and she actually takes children out of Japan and brings them to the States for a little while, just so they can have some normality and and try to heal. But it's a silent killer. It's contaminating the ocean. I don't know how many times somebody has tried to tell me, "Oh, the ocean's big; it dilutes baloney." It's just too much. At some point, there's too much.
No, the bluefin tuna has been caught out on the West Coast in the Pacific that has traces of radiation in it, and you can argue about what's safe as far as the dosage of radiation, but it's not good. It's probably likely to get worse. And there's an example of corporations not caring and using faulty equipment, and these nuclear power plants exist in various countries of the world. They built one here in New York, an Indian Point. It's built on a fault line. Where are their heads? This is absolutely crazy. And, if they don't care for the rest of us, how about themselves and their kids and their grandchildren? This is just insanity. And if there's any kind of let's say a city killer asteroid or meteor comes down and and it doesn't have to be a direct hit, but it impacts in some way on one of these things. You can imagine what might happen.
Oh, I know. I'll tell you, we're getting hit from every front. Every time you turn around, you're hearing about new lake bed of water getting contaminated, or you got the BP oil spill, and then there was another BP oil spill in a lake in Michigan, and and this just keeps going on and on. We had the chemical spill in Virginia. It got in the water
Right.
supply. We've got radiation leak that was here in South Carolina that they says eventually will get into the water, the groundwater, and contaminate things. It's just ridiculous. I mean, we're killing ourselves, and by the time ET does get here, it's going to be a desert place. It's going to be like Mars,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's, people don't want to, people generally run in the other direction. They don't want to hear too much of this, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand that that people's, they're concerned about their own mortality. That comes into play. On the other hand, there are basically two camps. One camp that people who want to know, so that they can be prepared in whatever way they can be prepared. And then there are others, a lot of people, I'm afraid, much larger group of people who don't want to know. They're the ones, the people with their heads in the sand who just don't want to know. They can't deal with it. They don't want to be told.
Oh, yeah, they call it fear porn or fear mongering. And it's like, we got to talk about these things because they're happening. And, people need to be aware. And, I don't know how much we can do. I mean, something like that. And you think about, if we have a couple more major earthquakes and we have one or two more Fukushimas, I mean, this one, Fukushima itself is catastrophic, but add a couple more to it. And boy, would that speed up the process.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's, whether it's, let's hope none of these things happen, but it's obvious that they are. I mean, whether it's a Fukushima type event or Chernobyl or it's more earthquakes, more severe earthquakes. The weathermen are part of the cover-up. The television's weathermen, the meteorologists, are part of the cover-up. Now, of course, they're only following orders. They're the executives at the networks and stuff. And weather's a very big business. Very, very big business. It's a reason why people put on the news. A lot has to do with seeing the weather. So, but the meteorologists certainly are trained, and they trained observers, and they know what's really going on. And now they have to come up with all kinds of new descriptions for some of these weather anomalies that are happening with greater and greater frequency and ferocity. They talk about a polar express. They talk about whatever. Here in New York, when there was the Hurricane Sandy, they said that it wasn't a normal event, that it was several systems coming together in a way that they hadn't really come together before. And that's happening more and more and more. They're not just the tornadoes; they're super tornadoes, they're fire tornadoes. It's just no end in sight. And then, of course, you have these, talk about gravitational pull. You have these big openings in the I forget what it's called. These big openings in somebody's a sinkhole.
Oh yeah,
opening up. And in one case recently, I think it was like the sinkhole was maybe 2 or 3 blocks long.
Yeah, I just read about. I think that was a week or two ago. It was like 3 blocks long. That's and these things are more frequent. They're a lot more frequent. The earthquakes are more frequent. The storms are picking up, and people just want to ignore it. So I'm still.
And they want to ignore it until, of course, it hits them, and then they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we're definitely in for some trying times here, and my biggest concern now, when we talk about Planet X, I'm more worried about the nuclear power plants we have all around this globe. That alone, if people talk about getting on mountaintops to survive, What are you going to
Right.
do about all that radiation that's going to be let loose?
Well, I'll tell you something. You know, I had the owner of the Vivos survival shelters on my show, Robert. I forget his last name. And that's a very sophisticated, huge, you know, nuclear. I'm sorry, not nuclear, missile silo underground. And I think he has one location. I think he's planning two more. And they're basically like condominiums, and they're, you know, selling them for like maybe $100,000 for a couple of people, for family, whatever. And the thing about it is that when you go in there, even when he's showing people this, they go in there, they go down, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, I don't know that we could live like this underground." Now that thing, once they close the hatch on that, it's as fancy as it's supposed to be, and it's quite fancy. People will not, they will not open up the hatch for 1 year. That's the game plan. If for any reason it rises to that level of emergency where all of their clients go there in a hurry and take refuge there, and they seal that thing off, no one's getting out for a year. Can you imagine hundreds of people or more living underground for a year?
Yeah.
What that must be like?
And what if it's so bad that they get buried alive and that thing never opens?
Oh, well, there's no guarantee. There's no
Yeah.
guarantee.
Yep, I'll stay above ground. I'll take my chances. I'll dodge the fireballs.
Right.
But we know that the government has certainly got themselves prepared. They've got seed banks. They've got water supplies, food supplies, ammo supplies. They've got underground bunkers in cities. I've seen video of actual farms that they have set up underground. Yeah. So, you know, they're definitely prepared for something, and I don't think it's a nuclear war. I think it's much more than that.
Yeah.
So,
I agree.
Well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on the show here tonight. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to get out anything you'd like, websites, events you might have, anything. The floor is yours.
Well, my first book is called Alien Rock: The Rock and Roll Extraterrestrial Connection. It's about all of the major rock stars and virtually all of them, and then UFO encounters from Elvis to the Beatles and John Lennon and so many others. And that's available at Amazon.com. My website for the Cosmic Majority is www.cosmicmajority.org, O-R-G. That's www.cosmicmajority.org. If somebody wants to reach me personally, they can at my email address, which is Nebula, N as in Nancy, E-B-U-L-A, 2002 at AOL.com. It's Nebula, N-E-B-U-L-A, 2002 at AOL.com.
All right. Well, Michael, again, thank you so much, and we'll keep you linked up over on LateNightInTheMidlands.com on our links page. And I do appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. And I hope you get your show going soon.
Thanks very much, Michael.
All right. Have a good night, my friend.
Take care.
You too. All right, everybody. Michael Luckman.
Essentially that he wasn't able to find anything and it didn't go anywhere. Well, here was this man, Lawrence Rockefeller, who was very rich and very powerful, and he entertained the Clintons at his JY Ranch for a week or two on vacation, when they were on vacation. He was making a donation. I leaked the story at the time. He was making a donation to the Clinton re-election campaign, which he did. But he wanted to sell the Clintons on, Bill Clinton specifically, on opening up the information on Roswell. And he was delivering the key witnesses on a silver platter. He had people lined up, former military people, among them these 400 individuals and others, who were prepared to go public about Roswell. He absolutely didn't want to go anywhere near it. He said to Rockefeller at Rockefeller's ranch, He said that it was like a tar baby, and basically that's a folk tale, and it has to do with, essentially he was saying that's going to get stickier and stickier the more he deals with it. So he wasn't going to deal with it. Obviously, he felt that it was politically, a difficult thing for him to do.
Yeah. See, so how much do you think the government? I mean, some speculate that they don't want to let on how much they know because they don't want to tell people there's nothing they could do about it. And then there's others who think that the government's actually working with them. I don't know what to think. All I know is that it's a real phenomenon.
Yeah, well, no, I'm telling you, the government knows. The government knows a whole lot. They may not know everything, but they know a whole lot. One problem that the government has, and the various administrations have had, is that at this point they tell the truth about this. The public's going to want to know, well, how come you kept this locked up for 60 years? That's one problem. But Clinton's appearance on the Jimmy Kimmel show signals to me he didn't go on there. He may have been invited to go on there, but when he said he didn't, I don't even think he would have agreed to go on there if he wasn't prepared to say what he said about looking into Roswell and things like that. He may not know the exact questions that were going to be asked, but he was pretty prepared, I would say. And someone gave him the green light, or he realized that it was okay. Now, Bill Clinton pals around with George W. Bush Sr. And George W. Bush Sr., of course, was the head of the CIA. And the CIA has kept a lid on this UFO stuff from the beginning. And when Jimmy Carter, who also had his own UFO sighting, went to Bush Sr. and wanted to get the information about UFOs, he was told that he didn't have a need to know. Now, I think Bill Clinton got more information, but the irony is that Bill Clinton, about his appearance on Jimmy Kimmel, is that Bill Clinton has always been fascinated, very interested in Roswell. In fact, he told Webster Hubbell, his golfing buddy, who for a brief while before he wound up in jail, became the Assistant Attorney General under Janet Reno. And there were two things that he wanted to look into when he went over to the Justice Department. One was who killed John F. Kennedy, his hero, and secondly, what's going on with UFOs, what's the truth about UFOs. So there's a lot to this. I could tell you, I could say some things about Obama. It just goes on and on, but I think that we're being prepared now to just sort of switch tracks just slightly.
Yeah, I'll take whatever you got.
Okay, all right. Well, the thing that's going on with the environment, the earth changes, the enormous earth changes that are taking place, the weird weather, everything else. This is worldwide, and this is it's totally out of control. Now, some of it, admittedly, a lot of it has been made worse by mankind. First of all, we happen to be in what's known as an interglacial or pre-ice age stage in the evolution of the Earth. That's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. However, what mankind has done and the corporations has accelerated the problem of the greenhouse effect and stuff like that. But there is also, I'm convinced, an external force that's making it worse on a day-by-day basis. And that's what's hurling, I believe, responsible for hurling meteors, asteroids, and comets in our direction. Now, about a year ago, it's got a tremendous amount of publicity. About a year ago, there was a an asteroid, a meteor that came over Russia. You may recall it had the power, the estimate of 30 million hydrogen bombs. So this is like a flying 30 hydrogen bombs.
My God.
And it didn't impact, but it shook so much, it created such a shake, so much movement on the ground that 1,200 Russian citizens were cut by flying glass. Fortunately, there were no deaths that I'm aware of. Just the very same, and NASA didn't see it coming. The very same day, there was an asteroid 150 feet across that came within 5 minutes of striking Earth. Now, that was a smaller one and less powerful one, but could have still done enormous damage. It could have wiped out a city, perhaps.
And that was the asteroid that, because I do remember they said that there was an asteroid that was going to make a close passage, and it wasn't it that same day.
That's the asteroid. And then 2 weeks later, or less than 2 weeks later, meteors were seen in at least 10, maybe up to 10 different cities all over the world. In Cuba, in Saudi Arabia, New York. I don't have the list in front of me, but it was all over the place, all over the place. And Sims are going to call, if they call anyone. and he didn't, at that point, he really wasn't grounded in the subject at all, so I had an advantage on him. He has since gotten to know a little bit more about it, and his skeptical side is come out. And I've been trying to get back on the show for a while, and so far I haven't been able to. And as you probably know, this is a subject that the news media basically tries to belittle and tries to sidestep and ignore. And proof of that is that there were these hearings, these mock hearings in Washington not that long ago, which Steve Bassett had put together with a lot of the key government whistleblowers having to do with Roswell and UFOs in general. And it was chaired by 5 former congressmen and senators. So it was a very compelling conference that went on for a couple of days. And while it was covered by the media, the major networks and stuff basically didn't show up. And that's just, sinful, but that's the way it is. Now, I'm as I say, I still am always willing to debate the issues of UFOs, whether they exist or not. But the reality is, the truth is that I have in my possession 400 videotape depositions by 400 former military people. Many of them served in the Pentagon in the 60s and 70s. They're all prepared to testify before Congress, every single one of them, if they're granted presidential immunity, something which Lawrence Rockefeller, the late New York-based philanthropist, tried to get the Clinton administration to do. Clinton was, of course, on Jimmy Kimmel's show a few weeks ago, and he really put his foot in his mouth. He said first he said, of course, that it wouldn't be surprised if extraterrestrials, I shouldn't say of course, he said it wouldn't be surprised if extraterrestrials landed here someday.
Yeah.
Okay, to me that was very, very important that he said that, because no other president or former president ever come close to making that kind of a statement, and it suggests that we're being prepared for the reality of contact in the not too distant future. When that is, I don't know.
That's what I think. I think we're being conditioned. But yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah. Okay. Secondly, he said, he almost verbatim quoted Ronald Reagan without attribution. He said that the various governments of the world and different nations with their various differences would all come together and unite in the face of an alien threat, and which Ronald Reagan said it 5 times, even in a major speech at the United Nations. And Ronald Reagan had a couple of sightings himself, very dramatic ones, as a matter of fact. But what really got my goat was when Bill Clinton said on Jimmy Kimmel's show that they had looked into Roswell, they looked into Area 51.
Michael Luckman, he is our guest tonight, and we've got a lot to talk about with Michael, so let's see if we can get him on the line with us here. Hopefully I don't dial the wrong number again, and we'll be all set. Hello, Michael. This is
Yes.
Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Hey, how are you? I'm great.
I'm doing good. I want to thank you so much for coming on and spending some time with us tonight.
Okay. How long are we going to go, by the way?
Anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. It's
Okay.
okay.
Sounds good. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, I don't know exactly where you'd like to start. I guess we could start with you telling a little about you and where all this started for you.
Okay.
All right.
I've been at this now, at UFO research for about 25, 30 years at least. And it began when I was editing and publishing a new newspaper in New York called the New York Daily Planet at that time. And we were looking to do things that were different from conventional papers or even underground newspapers at that time. So I figured we would that it might be interesting to look into starting a regular section on UFOs. And I didn't really know at that point what existed, but I started to do some research, and I found that there were organizations and that there was real material out there, and that was worthwhile, as well as I was particularly drawn by photographs. Even at that time, there were some excellent cases. So that's what got me started. I decided, this was around the time of the release of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, that I got a contract for a book with Simon and Schuster. It was to be a picture book, essentially 50% pictures, and there were color pictures, and it would be a large format book, very expensive to produce. I did my end of it, and but they didn't keep to their end of the bargain. They had to cut back that particular season, unfortunately, cut back their budget. So therefore, the book never really came out. But it got me going, and I met a man by the name of Coleman Bronkowski, who's passed on now, who was with a group called IQFON, and he was a retired major in the Royal Hungarian Army, and was very much into UFOs, and between information and documents that I got from him, and also from Peter Gerson, who was an attorney, who was the first one here in New York, was the first one to sue the government under the Freedom of Information Act for the release of documents. So slowly we began to accumulate an enormous amount of data, and that's what got me started. And once you get involved with this subject, it's like emotional quicksand. There's no getting out. It's just that kind of a thing.
Oh yeah, it's quite a rabbit hole, isn't it?
It is, and unbelievable, as a matter of fact. And then more recently, about 5 years ago, I wanted to do a book about rock stars and UFOs, because I had known that there were lots of rock groups out there and individual rock stars who had not only believed in these things, but also had experiences. But as I started to dig around, I found out that there was a remarkable number of rock stars that have had these experiences. And what was particularly telling to me was that it included many of the key rock and roll icons, from Elvis to the Beatles, John Lennon specifically, as well as Jimi Hendrix, David Bowie, and on and on and on. So Jerry Garcia, and many, many others. So that was my first published book, which was Alien Rock, the Rock and Roll Extraterrestrial Connection, which ironically was also Simon and Schuster. And then more recently, I've been working on a book, a sequel to the Alien Rock book, called Rock Stars, Hollywood, and Alien Contact, Celebrities Inside Secrets. And I'll tell you, at this point, Michael, I have literally hundreds of well-known rock stars and Hollywood celebrities who have had all kinds of remarkable things happen to them, ranging from UFOs. And my book is not only about UFOs, it's concentrating on that, but it's also getting into other paranormal activities and beliefs. And so there's just no end to this in sight. And this has been the time in the I would say within the last few years, that many rock stars and particularly many Hollywood celebrities have come forward, come out of the closet, as it were, with this subject. And and it's increasingly a popular subject, particularly with the rise of the popularity of shows like Ancient Aliens on History Channel, things of that nature. And so there's it's going to be a blockbuster book, I can tell you that. And I don't want to give away too much of what's in the book. I can give you a few examples
Sure.
later. It's a shocker, I can tell you that.
Oh, I bet it is. I mean, just the short time I've been doing this radio show, I have come across more information, more documentation, more stories, and then I've had my own sightings. So I know that this phenomena is real. And what in your research, what have you found out? Any smoking guns?
Well, well, smoking guns. Well, first of all, I've long debated this with lots of people. I've been on television many times on some major shows. I was even on the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash. I was on Bill O'Reilly's show on the Fox News Channel, if you can believe that. And Bill wound up saying that you're the guy, the alien